So we've just heard a lot of information about adolescent development and why youth do what they do and what is a natural part of their development. And you may be thinking, okay, now what? So what we want to talk about now are some of the ways that the information you just heard from Dr. Kavanaugh will help us understand how adolescent development impacts what we do and how we do what we do. And so Judge Gray and I are going to talk about 3 different areas that we really want you to take into account when you are making your decisions in juvenile court. And the first consideration that I'm going to discuss with you is positive youth development. Now, positive youth development isn't a program. It's really a philosophy and an approach that emphasizes seeing youth as a resource and looking at their strengths and trying to foster and support them in having their strengths play a role in how they ultimately are successful when they come before you. And positive youth development really contrasts to some of the ways that we've traditionally looked at youth, either as victim or as villain. And again, it really focuses on how can we look to them as a resource and really look at what their strengths are, what the opportunities are, rather than looking at simply compliance and maybe what their deficits are. And all of this is important in areas such as when we're looking at terms and conditions of probation. You know, oftentimes we look at, well, what are we going to tell this child not to do? And we don't really take a good look at what do we want them to do, what do we know they're capable of doing, and how can we support them and encourage them to build those strengths and build on the interests that they have in order to pro-socially develop while they're on probation. You know, oftentimes we are concerned with limiting what youth can do and telling them through terms and conditions, we don't want you to associate with this person, we don't want you to use this type of substance, we don't want you to miss school, but we fail to look at what the other things are that we can put in place that are consistent with the adolescent development information we've just heard in order to help them positively develop and not just make it through. Judge Gray is now going to talk to you about racial justice and procedural justice.
All right, so I'm going to spend quite a bit of time actually talking about racial justice and procedural justice as we move toward the end of our webinar. So I hope by now that there is no judge in particular, who doesn't understand that and is not aware that racial disparities are a huge part of the problem in juvenile justice. And judges can help address these disparities by being a check on decisions that have been made by the police, by the prosecutor, by considering the race equity implications of all of the decisions that are made. The disproportionate representation of youth of color in the juvenile justice system can't be explained just by differences in adolescence or even in the differences in behavior across racial and ethnic groups. In every case involving a person of color, a judge should check implicit perceptions of culpability associated with race and begin with the viewpoint that the youth is exhibiting normal adolescent behavior and is amenable to redirection. And I want to say that again because I really think it's important. When we start working with young people, we should remember that they are exhibiting normal adolescent behavior, Dr. Kavanaugh talked about it, and is amenable to redirection, which is important for when we're down at the disposition stage, what are we doing to try to redirect them in appropriate ways. So once the judge has heard from all of those interested in the decision, including the child, the judge should ensure that the proposed disposition is developmentally appropriate and strengthens the child's likelihood for success while accounting for public safety and that it's not driven by implicit or explicit bias. Many times when we're in the work, judges get criticized because they say that we are so concerned about the children that we forget about public safety. And so I want people to understand that we are not saying we're not holding youth accountable for public safety, but we need to do it in developmentally appropriate ways. So for every white youth in out-of-home placement in 1997, there were 4.9 black youth, 2.4 Latino youth, 2.4 Native American youth, and 1 Asian Pacific Islander youth. For every white youth in home placement in 2013, in out-of-home placement, there were 4.3 black youth, 1.6 Latino youth, 3.7 Native American youth, and 0.3 Asian Pacific Islander youth. But what we see is black youth consistently bear the brunt of out-of-home placement for youthful misbehavior. For the last 15 years, black children were more than four times as likely as white children to spend the night in out-of-home placement. Latino youth have been between 1.5 times to 2 times as likely as white youth to be committed to out-of-home placement. Moreover, the data consistently indicate that Latino youth are undercounted, making it likely that the disparity is even more significant. Most troubling is the trend for Native American youth. The likelihood that Native American youth will spend the night in court-ordered out-of-home placement is growing, from 2.4 times as likely as white youth in 1997 to 3.7 times as likely as 2013. And I almost said 2018 because I was thinking it would be really helpful if we could have this information updated and have more current numbers. I remember years ago when I made a presentation, and as quite often I'm asked to talk about African American youth and cultural appropriateness and cultural sensitivity. And one of the things I said, when I began to look at African American youth and compare them to Native American youth, I really felt like, oh my God, why am I not more concerned about Native American youth? Because actually, when you look at the numbers, they far much worse. The features of adolescent development we have found are consistent along all racial and ethnic groups. Research studies that have controlled for race and ethnicity found no significant difference in the key characteristics of adolescent development, such as impulsivity, sensation seeking, susceptibility to peer influence, and limited fear orientation across all youth. Kids are kids, basically, is the way I reduce that. No matter what color, they are kids. And what we know is that their behavior is consistent across race. The disproportionate representation of youth of color in the juvenile justice system cannot be explained by differences in adolescent development or differences in behavior or other racial and ethnic groups. In every case involving youth of color, a judge should check implicit perceptions of culpability associated with race, beginning with the viewpoint that the youth is exhibiting, again, normal adolescent behavior and is amenable to redirection. So the other thing we want to say is that racial disparities and racial disproportionality exist despite the fact that developmental psychologists have found that the common trends and common features of adolescence are present across all races and socioeconomic groups. All things are the same across all groups. They behave the same way. Features of adolescent development are consistent across all racial and ethnic groups. A number of studies on adolescent development have controlled for race and socioeconomic status, finding no significant differences. There's a study by Kaufman, I think it's cited in one of the footnotes on the bench card, showing a preference in adolescents for risk-taking and short-term reward over long-term gain, but no significant differences between ethnicities. That's in a Steinberg study. On future orientation, there is a study that shows youth of similar ages, and the study exhibited similar levels of weak future orientation when controlling both for ethnicity and socioeconomic status. So I believe what that means is, you know, we always talk about young people don't have the ability to defer gratification. So thinking about if I wait until tomorrow, if I wait until next year, young people don't have the ability to do that. It's here and now. There's also a study that found that patterns in resistance to peer pressure, generally all groups are about the same. Everybody succumbs to peer pressure. Everybody wants to be liked. Sensation seeking, all youth have increased sensation seeking and impulsivity across ethnic groups. Because again, all kids are kids. They're in a process where it is only normal and natural that they're going to do these kinds of things. And if we think about it, being inquisitive, seeking things, really helps them to grow and to develop. So when we have young babies, what we want them to do is explore and experience things, so that we let them touch, we let them feel. And it's the same thing for kids, teenagers. They need to be able to explore in a safe setting, is what we would hope they would do in a safe setting, some of these things, so that they can develop the skills that we want them to develop. But one of the more fascinating studies about implicit racial bias in Black children is a collection of studies by Philip Goff and a team of researchers who looked at the public perceptions of innocence and culpability among Black youth. In one part of the study, the participants were shown a series of pictures of white, Black, and Latino children engaged in some sort of criminal activity. Then the participants were asked about the age of the young people who were participating in the criminal activity. And what they found was the participants were asked to estimate the age and culpability of the young people. And for African American youth, the participants indicated their age was 5 years older than their actual age. But on the other hand, for white felony suspects, they only estimated their age by more than 1 year. The study shows that the general population sees Black children as less innocent than white children and more similar to adults. Blacks rated high as more culpable than Latinos, Latinos more culpable than whites. So as you are making your decisions, it's important, when I talked earlier about the impact that others' decisions have on what judges are seeing in the courtroom and what we are doing, the question always becomes, are we adding on? Are we another layer of that implicit bias or the unfairness that is being meted out in the perception by African American parents and children? A judge should use procedural fairness principles in all court hearings. And procedural fairness speaks to 4 principles: being fair in the process, being transparent in the actions, providing an opportunity for voice for the young person to be heard, and being impartial in decision making. This impartiality, I'm going to start with 4th first. This impartiality is important for judges because that is what the #1 canon says. A judge should be impartial in their decision making. The research at done by Yale University Professor Tom Tyler and other leaders in the field has demonstrated that perceptions of fairness are driven not only by outcomes, but also by the fairness and consistency of the process used to reach these outcomes. So the fair process, so they get timely notice. Do they have an opportunity to have an attorney? And does the attorney have an opportunity to meaningfully consult with their client, advise their client before they're in court? Transparent actions are all the things that are happening with the child out in the open. Are they in the court? Are we not back in the judge's chambers making decisions and then coming out announcing those decisions as if everybody participated in the process? So the process requires transparency and openness. The decisions are unfolded in the court as much as possible, and the reasoning behind the decision. So quite often, as judges, we are tempted to tick off our decision without providing reasons for why we are making a decision. And for the appearance of fairness and procedural fairness in the process, we need to make sure that we are explaining clearly and appropriately, age-appropriately, what we are doing. People want an opportunity not only to understand what is happening, but also to feel that they have an opportunity for voice, to ensure that their side of the story is heard. And it doesn't mean that when we say that side of the story is heard, that doesn't mean that the child has to get on the bench and talk about, on the witness stand and talk about what he or she did or did not do. But at some point, the judge needs to let the child have an opportunity to ask questions or participate in the proceeding. Nobody wants to feel like someone else is in control of their future. We don't, children don't either. We want a voice in the decisions that are made. We want people to hear and listen. And hearing and listen doesn't always mean, as I tell the young people in my court, that I am going to do what you ask. But I will give you an opportunity to say what you want, and you can tell me why you want it. And then I will respond to that by saying, well, we can't do that in this case because, or we can't do that exactly, but we may be able to do this. And so those kinds of things allow young people to feel like their voice is being heard. And I believe it aids to the possibility that they will be compliant, not only being compliant, but they will grow from the process of being in court. So the judge needs to listen to the child and consider how their expressed opinion can shape the court's disposition and outcomes. A child is more likely to engage and comply when they identify their own strengths and needs. A judge should be clear, firm, and respectful. The judge should be a powerful motivator by openly recognizing success and encouraging continued growth and opportunity. Outcomes are improved when children and their families feel like they have been treated respectfully, sincerely, and fairly. And that's what we want. So to figure out how to create in the courtroom the environment in which people feel that their needs are being addressed.